Hey y'all, Zach McDonald, your real estate agent with Real Property Associates, and today we are going to discuss whether Seattle is in a buyer's market state or whether it's still a seller's market. A few years back, I recorded a video where I talked about the differences between a buyer's market and a seller's market. Essentially, we compared and contrasted a few different points. And I'm gonna list off those points for you in this video here as we get started to consider some of the characteristics of a buyer's market versus a seller's market, and then we'll talk about what's going on in the market right now. In that video a few years ago, I mentioned a few key levers or distinguishing marks of a buyer's market versus seller's market. So essentially, on one end, you've got increased inventory, right? Buyer's market, decreased inventory, seller's market, time on the market. So in a buyer's market, a longer amount of time on the market. In a seller's market, shorter amount of time on the market. Decreased competition in a buyer's market or increased competition, right, in a seller's market. Lower prices here in a buyer's market, higher prices in a seller's market, and then negotiating power, number 5. In a buyer's market, the buyers have the leverage, so to speak, and in a seller's market, the sellers have the leverage. And if I was to sum it all up in one word, I would say a buyer's market is when a buyer has an advantage in a purchase, right? They have the leverage, and that can be the one that you camp on. A seller's market is when the sellers have the advantage, they have the leverage in negotiations, right? These other things are part of it, right? It might help explain it, but you could boil it down to buyers having an advantage in a buyer's market, sellers having advantage in a seller's market. Now, that's simplistic, but what I want to do is I want to say in Seattle right now, we've been seeing some of these different trends, and people have been asking, is this a buyer's market, right? Is this a buyer's market? And I want to share a few stats, and we're just going to take a snapshot of December 2009. Okay, I randomly picked a spot from a few years ago, and when I say a few years ago, we're talking about more than 10 years ago, back when we were in the middle of kind of the beginning of the Great Recession. And if we're looking at the housing prices then, December 2009, we are looking at houses selling for 93.3% and 94% of asking price, the original asking price in Seattle and Bellevue, respectively, all right? And we also saw about 4.1 months of supply, right, inventory in Seattle, 6.7 months of supply in Bellevue. Looking at the days on market from December 2009, we had 61 days on market in Seattle and 67 days on market in Bellevue. Okay, so 2009, we're definitely in a buyer's market, and it's going to check a lot of these boxes. We saw inventory increasing to fairly substantial numbers. We saw the time on the market increasing, right? 61 days, 67 days. We saw the competition decreasing, which is why we're seeing prices going down. And we're also seeing that buyers have the ability to negotiate the price because there are so many houses available based on the amount of buyers that are actually in the market. Now, if we fast forward to today, okay, we just did our most recent Seattle real estate market update, and we were looking at numbers from August 2022, and we were looking at Seattle and Bellevue numbers. Days on market, median 9 days in Seattle, 16 is the average from last month, 13 days on market and versus 21 for an average, right? So houses are still selling very quickly. Definitely not 61 and 67 days on market, right? But they're up from where they were at the same time last year. If you look at the percentage of the original asking price in Seattle, 98.2% the original asking price. So houses are selling for less, but definitely not 93%. Bellevue, though, it's interesting, 92.4% of the original asking price in Bellevue last month, whereas it was 94 back in December 2009. Now, we could get into why that is, add some context. In 2009, we already had seen the market starting to correct. It was in a bad spot. People were probably listing a little bit more realistically back then, whereas some of the houses that were selling last month in Bellevue, some of those might have been on the market for months and were kind of the initial houses to see the prices going down. So maybe in a few months, these numbers might be a little less dramatic in Bellevue, But right now, 92.4%, it is beating the numbers back in December 2009. If we look at the amount of inventory or supply, we talked about 4.1 months in Seattle, 6.7 months in Bellevue. Last month, we had 1.4 months of supply at the end of the month in Seattle and 2 months of supply in Bellevue. So if we're going to be super objective here, we're seeing some of the signs of a market trending towards a buyer's market. We're seeing decrease in prices, that's for sure. Median sales prices are down from the highs in the spring. March and April were kind of the highs for Seattle, Bellevue areas, respectively. We're also seeing time on the market going up. Houses are taking longer to sell. We're also seeing a decrease in competition. Far fewer multiple offer situations. Almost, it seemed like everything was selling with multiple offers, unless it was a fixer-upper on a busy road that you could hear the highway from, And even then, sometimes it was selling with multiple offers. But that's changed, right? Houses are taking longer to sell. You have lower prices, right? You have houses selling for below their asking prices, not above their asking prices. And the negotiating power has switched hands. Sellers aren't giving houses away by any means right now, but there's not as much of that strong arm like, well, tomorrow we're going to have another buyer that's going to pay us more, so take it or leave it. I think some of that mentality has had to go out the window recently. But if we're really getting objective, right, we're comparing the numbers, we're clearly not in a buyer's market like we were back in 2009, but we're seeing some of those signs now, some of the early signs of heading towards what I would say a more balanced market. And historically speaking, when you're in the 2 to 3 months or less of supply in the market, houses are still selling fairly quickly. That would be more of that would be more of a seller's market, right? That would be more of a seller's market. But as we're starting to trend more towards a balanced market where there is still some equity, right? Maybe a little bit more equity when there wasn't any equity before, where there's a little negotiating room on some terms and the price, but sellers are still getting a pretty good price for their house. It's still selling fairly quickly. There's not too much supply on the market yet. But what will happen is if we continue to trend in this direction, which recently I talked about, and most recently in my market update, we're actually seeing inventory start to decline again, right? So the inventory is actually higher if we were looking at July's numbers versus August's numbers. But if we were to continue to trend in this direction of more inventory in the market, houses taking even longer to sell, then we would be entering into that buyer's market category. Most people would say that 3 to 5 months on the market is probably more of a balanced market, and then more than that, right? 6 plus, even sometimes 5 plus is going to be more of a buyer's market. Now, I would argue the buyer's market starts even sooner than that, because if you get to that 4 or 5 months on the market back in 2009, it was by no means even balanced, right? Buyers had the advantage, and it continued for multiple years, and we saw prices continue to decline in the Seattle area, and it recovered quickly in Seattle comparatively to other places in the country, and I know there's still some place in the country where it never completely recovered all the way, but if we're looking objectively, right, again, I've mentioned that word a few times, I think we're still in a seller's market, but we're trending in that direction of a more balanced market. And I think a story from a couple weeks ago really illustrates this point. And a client asked me this same question, which is why I'm sharing it with you. When people ask me these questions multiple times, for me that's a cue that I should make a video about it. And the client asked me, they said, Zach, are we in a buyer's market? And I said, well, no, but I think your situation explains it. And I did share this in, I think, my most recent Market Watch too. The house had just come on the market. They wanted to get their offer in immediately, after we saw it immediately, and they wanted to pay asking price immediately. And we got our offer in. We set a quick expiration. The seller said, I'm going to hold off and see if some other offers come in. I don't feel the pressure to take your full price offer with good terms. And there were multiple other offers that came in, and one of them was, better terms and cash. Okay, so in this situation, the seller waited, got more and better terms, and it all happened within 24 hours. So I think that story itself just demonstrates that although we're trending in the direction of balance in the real estate market in the Seattle area, we're still pretty far away from that. And this isn't the only instance that I've seen recently where there's been multiple offers. So I guess that's what I got to say about it. I think the answer to the question is complicated. I think some houses have been sitting on the market. Maybe were priced a little high to start with because of what neighbors had sold for. Again, realistically, but at the same time, interest rates have gone up. Our market is fairly interest rate sensitive, right? Higher prices makes the affordability effect greater, right? The negative effects of the interest rate are higher when you have bigger numbers involved in the smaller numbers. So in our market, it's definitely more attached to those interest rates. The lower rates are going to fuel the market a lot more, and that's why we've seen some of the higher growth in the country, but now we're seeing a little bit more of the bigger stall out here recently. So buyer's market, no, but heading for balance, most certainly. Thanks so much for watching this video as we dive into the market conditions here in the Seattle area. I do make videos on a weekly and monthly basis where I talk more about the Seattle area real estate market. If you're interested in seeing those videos and haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so. And if you want to talk more about your situation and what it might look like to buy or sell here in the area, please feel free to reach out.